Before the United States was born, long before European ships crossed the Atlantic, this vast land was already home to millions of people. They were farmers, hunters, builders, and storytellers. They developed societies rich in culture and tradition, living in balance with the land for thousands of years. This is the history of the first peoples of North America, and the first encounters that would set the stage for the birth of a new nation. Archaeological evidence shows that humans first arrived in North America as early as 15,000 years ago, crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia during the Ice Age. Over millennia, these early peoples spread across the continent, adapting to diverse environments. By the time Europeans arrived, North America was home to an estimated 10 to 15 million people. These societies were not uniform. They were incredibly diverse. In the southwest, the ancestral Pueblones built cliff dwellings and intricate irrigation systems. The great city of Chaco Canyon thrived between 900 and 1150 CE, serving as a center of trade and astronomy. In the Mississippi Valley, the Mississippian culture created vast mound complexes. The city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was home to tens of thousands around the year 1200 CE, making it one of the largest cities in the world at its time. In the northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy, formed in the 12th or 15th century, united multiple tribes under a democratic council system. Historians note that their Great Law of Peace influenced the framers of the U.S. Constitution centuries later. Across the Great Plains, nomadic peoples hunted bison, while coastal groups like the Chumash and Tlingit built sophisticated societies based on fishing and trade. These cultures thrived independently, connected through trade networks that stretched across the continent. The first Europeans to set foot in North America were not the English, but the Norse. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson, a Viking explorer from Greenland, reached the coast of Newfoundland in present-day Canada. The site, known as L'Anse aux Meadows, remains the earliest known European settlement in North America. But it was not until 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed under the Spanish crown, that a wave of European exploration and colonization began. Though Columbus landed in the Caribbean, his voyages opened the door to the Age of Discovery. In 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon arrived in Florida and claimed it for Spain. In 1540, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led an expedition through the American Southwest in search of mythical cities of gold. Spanish influence spread through missions and forts, especially in Florida, New Mexico, Texas, and California. Meanwhile, the French explored further north. In 1534, Jacques Cartier claimed parts of Canada for France. By the early 1600s, Samuel de Champlain had founded Quebec, establishing a lasting French presence. French explorers also traveled down the Mississippi River, claiming the vast Louisiana Territory in 1682. The English, too, sought a foothold. Their first attempts, like the Roanoke colony in 1587, ended in mystery when settlers vanished without a trace. But in 1607, the English succeeded in establishing Jamestown, Virginia, as the first permanent English colony in North America. Religious tensions in Europe also shaped America's early story. In 1620, a group of English separatists known as the Pilgrims sailed aboard the Mayflower. They landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts, and signed the Mayflower Compact, a self-governing agreement before setting foot on land. 10 years later, in 1630, the Puritans established the Massachusetts Bay Colony, seeking to build a city upon a hill. These settlements became important foundations for American religious and cultural identity. But colonization came at a cost. Native peoples, such as the Wampanoag, initially aided the Pilgrims and taught them how to grow corn and survive harsh winters. Over time, however, tensions grew. Conflicts such as the Pequot War in 1636 and King Philip's War in 1675 devastated native communities, marking a tragic beginning to centuries of displacement. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, more colonies were founded. In 1632, Maryland became a haven for Catholics. In 1681, Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, welcomed Quakers and promoted religious tolerance. In 1732, Georgia was established as a buffer against Spanish Florida. The 13 colonies grew rapidly, their populations fueled by immigration, agriculture, and trade. Enslaved Africans were brought across the Atlantic in the brutal Middle Passage. Beginning in the early 1600s, by the mid-1700s, slavery had become central to the Southern economy, laying the foundation for future conflicts. Colonial economies flourished, and cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia became bustling centers of commerce. Yet, colonists still saw themselves as British subjects, bound by loyalty to the crown. That loyalty, however, would soon be tested. As the 18th century progressed, European rivalries spilled into North America. The French and Indian War, 1754-1763, part of the global 7 Years' War, pitted Britain against France, with native nations drawn into the struggle. Britain emerged victorious, but the cost was staggering. To recover expenses, Britain imposed new taxes on its colonies. Colonists began to question their relationship with the crown. The seeds of revolution were being planted. From the ancient cities of Cahokia to the founding of Jamestown and Plymouth, from indigenous nations to the arrival of explorers, this land's story was already centuries old when the idea of America began to take shape. The first encounters between native peoples and Europeans would forever change the continent, sometimes through cooperation, often through conflict. As the colonies grew, so did their ambitions, setting the stage for independence and the birth of a new nation. By the mid-1700s, the 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast had grown from fragile settlements into thriving communities. Yet beneath the prosperity, tensions with Britain simmered. The seeds of independence were being planted, and soon the colonies would defy an empire. After the establishment of Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, more English colonies took root. By the early 1700s, 13 colonies stretched from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. Each region developed a distinct identity. New England colonies, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire were built on Puritan values, with economies based on small farms, fishing, and trade. Middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware were diverse, with fertile lands, religious tolerance, and bustling ports. Southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia relied heavily on plantation agriculture, producing tobacco, rice, and indigo with the forced labor of enslaved Africans. By 1700, the colonial population had reached 250,000. By 1770, it soared to over 2 million. Cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston became centers of commerce, ideas, and politics. Colonial life combined European traditions with new American experiences. Town meetings and colonial assemblies gave settlers a taste of self-government, while newspapers and pamphlets spread ideas quickly across the Atlantic world. In the early 1700s, a religious revival known as the Great Awakening swept through the colonies. Preachers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield inspired emotional sermons that emphasized personal faith over tradition. The revival weakened established churches and encouraged independent thought. For many colonists, it was their first experience challenging authority, an attitude that would later influence politics as well as religion. But colonial growth brought conflict. France, Spain, and Britain all claimed territory in North America. The struggle came to a head in the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. In 1754, a young George Washington led a Virginia militia into the Ohio River Valley, sparking clashes with French forces. The war soon spread, becoming part of the global 7 Years' War. Native American nations took sides, some aligning with the French, others with the British. For nearly a decade, battles raged from the forests of New York to Canada. The turning point came in 1759, when British forces captured Quebec. The Treaty of Paris, 1763, ended the conflict. Britain gained control of Canada and lands east of the Mississippi River. France lost most of its North American empire. But victory came at a cost. The war left Britain with enormous debt, and the Crown expected the colonies to help pay. After the war, Britain tightened its control over the colonies. In 1763, King George III issued the Proclamation Line, forbidding colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains, angering those hungry for land. Then came new taxes. The Sugar Act, 1764, taxed sugar and molasses. The Stamp Act 1765 required printed materials from newspapers to legal documents to bear a paid stamp. The Townshend Acts, 1767, taxed goods like glass, paper, and tea. Colonists protested fiercely. They argued no taxation without representation, demanding that only their elected assemblies, not the distant British Parliament, had the right to tax them. In 1765, the Stamp Act Congress met in New York, uniting colonies in opposition. The Sons of Liberty, led by figures like Samuel Adams, organized boycotts and demonstrations. Under pressure, Britain repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, but the struggle was only beginning. Tensions exploded in Boston 1770. British soldiers sent to enforce order clashed with angry crowds. On the night of March 5, 1770, soldiers opened fire on colonists, killing 5 people. The event, quickly dubbed the Boston Massacre, shocked the colonies. Engravings by Paul Revere spread outrage, portraying the British as ruthless aggressors. For many, it was proof that the Crown no longer respected their rights. Britain continued to test colonial patience. The Tea Act of 1773 allowed the struggling British East India Company to sell tea at reduced prices, but with a tax still attached. On the night of December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor. They dumped 342 chests of tea into the water, an act forever remembered as the Boston Tea Party. The Crown responded with fury. In 1774, it passed the Coercive Acts, known in America as the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston's port, reduced Massachusetts' self-government, and allowed British troops to be quartered in colonial homes. Rather than weaken resistance, the acts united the colonies in anger. In September 1774, colonial leaders gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Representatives from 12 colonies coordinated boycotts, drafted petitions, and prepared for possible conflict. As 1775 began, the colonies stood on the brink of war. In April, British troops marched on Lexington and Concord to seize weapons from colonial militias. Shots were fired. The shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. From struggling colonies to a people united by shared grievances, the path to independence was now clear. The protests, the boycotts, the blood spilled in Boston, all of it had prepared the colonies for a final confrontation with Britain. The clash between British troops and the colonial militias at Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, on April 19, 1775, had marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. In June, colonial forces fortified the heights around Boston. The Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, ended in British victory. But the heavy casualties proved that the colonists could stand against one of the world's most powerful armies. In May 1775, delegates gathered once again in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. They appointed George Washington as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. The fight for independence was underway. At first, many colonists hoped for reconciliation with Britain. But by 1776, the idea of independence had spread like wildfire. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published a pamphlet named Common Sense, arguing passionately for separation from Britain and the creation of a republic. By summer, the Continental Congress moved toward independence. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson. It proclaimed that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It charged King George III with tyranny and declared the colonies to be free and independent states. The signing of the Declaration transformed the conflict into a fight for a new nation. The early years of the war were difficult. Washington's army suffered defeats in New York in 1776. The British captured New York City and used it as a base for the rest of the war. But in December, Washington struck back. On December 25, 1776, he led his troops across the icy Delaware River. and surprised Hessian forces at Trenton, New Jersey, claiming a much-needed victory. In 1777, British forces launched a campaign to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. But at Saratoga, New York, in October, American forces under General Horatio Gates defeated the British. The Battle of Saratoga proved a turning point. News of Saratoga convinced France to ally with the Americans. In 1778, France formally entered the war, providing military and financial support. Soon Spain and the Netherlands joined as well, turning the American struggle into a global conflict. Despite victories, the Continental Army faced immense hardship. During the winter of 1777 to 1778, Washington's troops encamped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Nearly 2,500 soldiers died from cold, hunger, and disease. But the army was transformed by training under Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who drilled the men into a disciplined fighting force. By 1779 and 1780, the war shifted to the south. The British captured Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston, South Carolina. Yet guerrilla fighters like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, harassed British troops, keeping resistance alive. In 1781, the war reached its climax. British General Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia, with French forces led by General Rochambeau, marched south while the French Navy blockaded Cornwallis by sea. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The victory at Yorktown effectively ended major fighting in the colonies. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, was signed. Britain recognized the independence of the United States and ceded territory. Stretching to the Mississippi River, the revolution had succeeded. A new nation was born. Independence was only the first step. Now the states faced the challenge of governing themselves. The Articles of Confederation, adopted in 1781, created a loose alliance of states with a weak central government. While it managed western lands and guided the nation through the final years of the war, it struggled with debt, trade disputes, and lack of unity. In 1786, unrest erupted in Massachusetts. Shays' Rebellion, led by farmers burdened with debt, revealed the weaknesses of the Articles. Many leaders feared the young republic might not survive without stronger government. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. Over 4 hot summer months, they debated how to balance state and national power, and how to create a government strong enough to endure, yet restrained to protect liberty. The result was the United States Constitution, signed on September 17, 1787. It established 3 branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial, each with checks and balances. After fierce debate, the Constitution was ratified by the states in 1788, and in 1789, George Washington took office as the first president of the United States. The revolution was complete. The 13 colonies had transformed into a united republic, built on ideals of liberty and democracy that would inspire the world. From the battlefields of Lexington to the halls of Philadelphia, the American Revolution was more than a war. It was the birth of a new political experiment, the United States of America. George Washington's leadership set critical precedents for the presidency. Sworn in at New York City, then the nation's capital, in April 1789, Washington worked to give the Constitution life. Congress quickly passed the Bill of Rights, 1791. The first 10 amendments guaranteeing individual liberties like freedom of speech, religion, and the press. In Washington's cabinet, Thomas Jefferson, who was the Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, embodied opposing visions of the nation's future. Hamilton sought a strong central government and a national bank to stabilize finances. Jefferson advocated for limited federal power and an agrarian republic. These divisions marked the birth of America's first political parties named the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Washington kept the nation neutral in foreign wars, especially as France and Britain fought in the 1790s. In his farewell address, 1796, he warned against permanent alliances and partisan divisions, advice that echoed through generations. In 1796, John Adams became the second president. His term was troubled by tensions with France, leading to the Quasi-War at sea. At home, the Alien and Sedition Acts, 1798, which restricted dissent and targeted immigrants, sparked fierce opposition. The election of 1800 proved pivotal. It was the first peaceful transfer of power between rival parties, as Adams stepped aside and Thomas Jefferson became president. The young republic had survived its first true test of democracy. Jefferson envisioned a republic of farmers, with limited government power. Yet his presidency brought one of the most significant expansions in U.S. history. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the nation's size, as the U.S. bought 828,000 square miles of territory from France for $15 million. This vast land stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. To explore it, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their famous expedition 1804 to 1806. Guided in part by Sacagawea, they mapped the West, recorded its resources, and established relations with native tribes. Jefferson also struggled with foreign pressures. Britain and France, locked in war, interfered with American trade. Jefferson responded with the Embargo Act of 1807, halting all exports. Intended to protect American interests, it instead crippled the U.S. economy. Tensions with Britain grew under Jefferson's successor, James Madison. British impressment, seizing American sailors for service in the Royal Navy, and support for native resistance in the Northwest pushed the nation toward war. In 1812, Congress declared war on Britain. The War of 1812 tested the fragile republic. American forces suffered defeats in Canada, but in 1813, Naval Commander Oliver Hazard Perry secured victory on Lake Erie. In 1814, British troops burned Washington, D.C., setting fire to the White House and the Capitol. Yet, American resilience shone through. That same year, Francis Scott Key, witnessing the bombardment of Fort McHenry, penned the words that became the Star-Spangled Banner. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent, 1814, restoring pre-war boundaries. But the decisive Battle of New Orleans, 1815, led by Andrew Jackson, gave Americans a surge of national pride. The war confirmed U.S. independence and ushered in what became known as the Era of Good Feelings. President James Monroe, elected in 1816, presided over a period of relative unity. The collapse of the Federalist Party left the Democratic Republicans dominant, yet challenges remained. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, maintaining balance in the Senate but exposing deep divisions over slavery. In foreign affairs, Monroe asserted U.S. influence in the Western Hemisphere. In 1823, he issued the Monroe Doctrine, declaring that European powers should no longer colonize or interfere in the Americas. It became a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. In 1824, a bitterly contested election led the House of Representatives to select John Quincy Adams as president. Despite Andrew Jackson winning the popular vote, Jackson's supporters denounced the result as a corrupt bargain. Adams promoted internal improvements, education, and infrastructure, but his vision faced opposition. Meanwhile, Jackson built a movement of ordinary citizens who demanded greater democracy and a voice in government. By 1829, Andrew Jackson rose to the presidency, marking a new era in American politics. His election was celebrated as a triumph of the common man. The United States, now 40 years old, had grown from a fragile republic into an expanding power with a growing sense of identity. But with growth came challenges, sectional divisions, debates over slavery, and struggles with Native Americans on the frontier. From Washington's steady hand to Jefferson's expansion, from the fires of the War of 1812 to the bold promise of the Monroe Doctrine, the early republic laid the groundwork for a nation destined to grow. Andrew Jackson's presidency reshaped American politics. Known as the Age of the Common Man, Jackson expanded suffrage by supporting the elimination of property requirements for white male voters. Politics became more democratic in appearance, with rallies, party conventions, and widespread participation. But Jackson's power also drew criticism. He wielded the veto more than any president before him, earning the nickname King Andrew from opponents. His battles with the Bank of the United States defined his presidency. Jackson viewed the bank as a tool of the wealthy elite, and in 1832, he vetoed its recharter, moving federal funds into state pet banks. Jackson's policies toward Native Americans left a dark legacy. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, authorizing the forced relocation of native tribes from their ancestral homelands in the southeast to territories west of the Mississippi River. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole resisted removal. The Cherokee even appealed to the Supreme Court in Worcester v. Georgia, 1832, which ruled in their favor. Jackson allegedly dismissed the decision, saying, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." The result was tragic. Between 1831 and 1838, thousands of Native Americans were forced on brutal march westward, in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands died from hunger, exposure, and disease. As the U.S. grew, regional differences deepened. In the North, industry and immigration fueled rapid urbanization. In the South, the plantation economy remained dependent on slavery and cotton, expanded by Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, 1793. Tensions exploded during the nullification crisis 1832-1833, when South Carolina declared federal tariffs unconstitutional and threatened secession. Jackson, though a Southerner, fiercely defended the Union, passing the Force Bill to authorize military action. Compromise, led by Henry Clay, averted conflict, but the issue of states' rights lingered. The 1830s and 1840s brought rapid westward migration. Americans embraced the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the nation was destined to expand across the continent. Settlers moved west along routes like the Oregon Trail, while new territories beckoned opportunity and conflict alike. Texas declared independence from Mexico in 1836, leading to iconic events such as the Battle of the Alamo. In 1845, Texas joined the Union, sparking tensions with Mexico. The Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, expanded U.S. territory dramatically. With the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, the U.S. gained lands that became California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. This expansion fulfilled much of manifest destiny, but reignited fierce debates over slavery in the new territories. In 1848, the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in California triggered the gold rush. By 1849, thousands of fortune seekers called 49ers flooded westward. California's population exploded, leading to its rapid admission as a free state in 1850. The gold rush highlighted both opportunity and displacement. Immigrants from around the world came seeking fortune, while native peoples were pushed aside and devastated by disease and violence. The question of slavery dominated national politics. The Compromise of 1850, engineered by Henry Clay, temporarily eased tensions. It admitted California as a free state, allowed popular sovereignty in Utah and New Mexico, and passed the harsh Fugitive Slave Act, requiring citizens to aid in capturing escaped slaves. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, promoted by Senator Stephen Douglas, opened new territories to popular sovereignty, letting settlers decide whether to allow slavery. This overturned the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and led to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. Meanwhile, the Dred Scott decision, 1857, by the Supreme Court ruled that African Americans, free or enslaved, were not citizens and had no right to sue in federal court. It also declared Congress had no power to ban slavery in the territories, inflaming Northern opposition. By the late 1850s, political divisions reached a breaking point. The new Republican Party, founded in 1854, opposed the expansion of slavery. Abraham Lincoln, a rising figure, gained national attention in the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, where he argued against the spread of slavery. When Lincoln was elected president in 1860, Southern states saw it as a direct threat to slavery. Within months, South Carolina seceded, followed by others. The nation was hurtling towards civil war. From Jackson's populist democracy to the tragedy of native removal, from the promise of westward expansion to the bitter disputes over slavery, this era revealed both the strengths and fractures of the young republic. The United States had grown in size and influence, but at the cost of deeper sectional divides.